is at stake is the soul of America.
Echoes of 1961 when violence erupted at the University of Georgia.
Jews like Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner were murdered in the Mississippi burning so that people who look like me could have the right to vote and the right to live freely and without the indignity of Jim Crow. And so I just have this sense that we're all in this together.
Martin Luther King Jr. had also kind of advocated for the Black and Jewish communities to come together because we're both oppressed peoples. I definitely think that there is some solidarity there.
Where you find Jew hatred, you'll inevitably find racism, you'll inevitably find homophobia, and several other forms of discrimination.
In 1961, at the University of Georgia, a tense atmosphere. Two black students, Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes, dared to enroll. Their arrival sparked outrage. A mob of 2,000 white students, locals, and Ku Klux Klan members gathered. Their mission? To intimidate and harm. Hunter and Holmes, pioneers for integration, faced a terrifying welcome. The mob hurled rocks at Hunter and Holmes' dorm. Windows shattered. Racial slurs filled the air. Fear hung heavy. Back then, as today, university officials failed to protect the victims. Officials forced Miss Hunter and Mr. Holmes to withdraw from the university, and Georgia state troopers escorted them home.
You go back if you have the chance.
Yes, I'd go back as soon as possible so that I could finish what I started there.
Yes, and I would also. Why were you crying when you were taken from the dormitory last night?
I was crying because I was very disappointed and very hurt that I had been suspended.
Days later, Judge Boodle ordered the university to readmit Miss Hunter and Mr. Holmes. Fast forward to today, a disturbing resurgence of hate and protest, this time against Jews, anti-Semitism on today's campuses. Sadly, history has a way of repeating itself. Today, a new wave of intolerance plagues college campuses, anti-Semitism.
The hostility of the anti-Israel protesters escalated from hate speech to physical violence. They beat several of my Jewish friends with flagpoles, megaphones, fists, and a belt. One Jewish student was hospitalized. I am one person representing countless students who feel the way I do. Unable to enjoy the freedom to study in a country that is known and admired for its academic freedoms. I am here imploring you, our policymakers, to compel my university to step up and show us what American values look like. We will not be silent until they act. Thank you. Am Yisrael Chai.
Jewish students face threats, harassment, and violence. Their identities are attacked. Their right to exist is questioned. This hate festers, often disguised as anti-Zionism, but the target is clear. Jewish students. Rock throwing, a tactic used against black students in 1961, has re-emerged.
And they were throwing them towards the side of the building.
One of my friends who's upstairs notices that rocks are being thrown at my window. She opened her window and she talked to them. One of the things they asked her is, "Are you Jewish?" And after she said yes, they threw a rock at her window.
A legacy of equality, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the fight for civil rights. The year is 1964, the Civil Rights Act is signed. Finally, a stand against discrimination. Title VI, a key part of this act, says no to segregation in schools. Not just that. This title prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. This victory was hard-won. Activists marched, protested, and faced down hate, their goal, equality for all. The fight for equal access to education begun back then. The Civil Rights Act didn't magically erase prejudice.
Casella is at the White House with the very latest. Megan. Hey, Mel, that's absolutely right. Breaking just in the last few minutes, Harvard is suing the Trump administration in federal court today, arguing that the administration's attempts to freeze multiple billions of dollars in federal grants are unconstitutional and illegal. They're asking the court to freeze or overturn or reverse any attempts to halt that funding. Now, Harvard's president, Alan Garber, says in a statement that the administration's actions are, quote, unlawful and beyond the government's authority. And this, of course, comes after the Trump administration was leveling a series of demands on Harvard over concerns mostly centering on anti-Semitism.
It was exactly 1 week ago now that Harvard rejected a list of conditions from the federal anti-Semitism task force. And in addition to the funding freeze, the Trump administration also threatened to revoke Harvard's tax exemption status and its ability to enroll foreign students.
The Trump administration set demands in a letter to Harvard on Friday. The Joint Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism insisted on detailed changes at the university to address anti-Semitism and civil rights violations, including, among other things, international admissions reform to prevent admitting students hostile to the American values and institutions in the United States Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Alan Garber stood up against the Trump administration, refusing to cave to demands that the university eliminate diversity programs, curb student protest, and allow federal audits in exchange for its federal funding. This bold stance by Garber's rejection of Trump's demands followed an announcement from federal agencies that they would review $9 billion in funding for Harvard 2 weeks earlier. The Trump administration swiftly hit back, freezing $2.2 billion in multi-year grants and $60 million in multi-year contracts for the university.
When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it.
On April 16th in Washington, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced the cancellation of 2 DHS grants totaling over $2.7 million to Harvard University, declaring it unfit to be entrusted with taxpayer dollars. The secretary also wrote a scathing letter demanding detailed records on Harvard's foreign student visa holders' illegal and violent activities by April 30, 2025, or face immediate loss of student and exchange visitor program certification. Secretary Noem said, Harvard bending the knee to anti-Semitism, driven by its spineless leadership, fuels a cesspool of extremist riots and threatens our national security. With anti-American pro-Hamas ideology poisoning its campus and classrooms, Harvard's position as a top institution of higher learning is a distant memory. America demands more from universities entrusted with taxpayer dollars. Since Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack on Israel, Harvard's foreign visa-holding rioters and faculty have spewed anti-Semitic hate, targeting Jewish students. This has led to increased scrutiny. With a $53.2 billion endowment, Harvard can fund its own chaos. DHS won't. And if Harvard cannot verify it is in full compliance with its reporting requirements, the university will lose the privilege of enrolling foreign students. This would be a significant blow. This action follows President Donald J. Trump's decision to freeze $2.2 billion in federal funding to Harvard University, proposing the revocation of its tax-exempt status over its radical ideology. The battle between Harvard and the Trump administration continues to unfold, with significant implications for the future of higher education funding in America.
DHS now giving Harvard 2 weeks to hand over records of international students' illegal or violent activities here. It says if that does not happen, Harvard will no longer be able to enroll international students. Also tonight, the Trump administration looking to the IRS to squeeze Harvard even further.
You're not entitled to a visa. Nobody here is entitled to a visa in any other country. They can determine it and they can revoke it at any time they want. Now, I think it's important. There's a clear distinction between protesting against the democratic order and protesting in favor of groups that advocate the slaughter and murder of innocent people, which is what many of these groups are supportive of. Beyond that, these groups are not just taking over. These are not sit-ins we're talking about. We are talking about buildings that have been vandalized, defaced, where they for months on end, and in some cases, we're just not going to continue to allow. I don't understand how people don't get a visa is a gift. It's a voluntary thing. We decide to give you a visa. We deny visas all over the world every day for a variety of reasons, and that means we can also revoke those visas. No one's entitled to a visa. The activities presented to meet the standard of what I've just described to you, people that are supportive of movements that run counter to the foreign policy of the United States. If necessary and a court compels us, we'll provide that information, but ultimately it's a visa. The judges don't issue student visas. There is no right to a student visa. we can cancel a student visa under the law just the same way that we can deny a student visa under the law, and we will do so in cases we find appropriate. The overwhelming majority of student visas in this country will not be revoked, because the overwhelming majority of people that are coming to this country to study are not involved and associated or aligned with organizations that seek to do damage in this country, and that frankly, organizations that hate the United States government and hate our way of life. So I just think it's crazy to continue to provide visas so people can come here and advocate for policies that are in direct contradiction of our national interests.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Do you think they should step down?
I certainly think the three of them should step aside. And I don't ever want any student, I don't care if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, I don't want anyone to be afraid to go to class, to be who they are.
Liz McGill has resigned following controversial statements regarding anti-Semitism.
The president of Harvard University, Claudine Gay, resigned today, weeks after her controversial testimony before Congress.
Why have so many people decided to side with the terrorist group, Hamas? And this is one of the questions I ask, and I think I try to answer in the book. And one of the epicenters of this has been American college campuses. These are people who are the contemporaries of people like the people who were dancing at the Nova Party in the early hours of the morning on October the 7th, when the terrorists came in and massacred them. But instead of having sympathy with their contemporaries in Israel, they decided from the 7th itself, on campuses like Columbia and elsewhere, to side with the killers, to side with the death cults. I think it is absolutely right that federal funding is removed from universities that allowed this. And just to do a counterfactual, can you imagine if any other minority was treated as Jewish students have been treated on some of these campuses? If black Americans had been chased across campuses in the US, threatened with lynching, we would all come out, we'd all be on their side and say, how dare you do this to our brothers and sisters, our fellow citizens?
Section 117 of the Higher Education Act of 1965 requires institutions of higher education to report significant sources of foreign funding. But because Section 117 has not been robustly enforced, the true amounts, sources, and purposes of foreign money flowing to American campuses are unknown. Due to this, President Trump signed a 2025 executive order aimed to end the secrecy surrounding foreign funds in American educational institutions and enforce the reporting requirements. The Department of Education opened investigations into universities regarding foreign funding. Faculty members and civil rights groups are pushing back hard. They're saying this is government overreach and a threat to academic freedom. The American Association of University Professors is also strongly against the administration's actions. They argue that the government shouldn't be dictating what universities teach.
And Harvard is responding tonight, saying that losing tax-exempt status would result in diminished financial aid for students, abandonment of critical medical research programs, and lost opportunities for innovation. The unlawful use of this instrument more broadly would have grave consequences for the future of higher education in America.
Cornell University received over $1.95 billion directly from Qatari foundations between 2001 and 2023, making Qatar its largest direct foreign donor. Qatar also donated a further $7.9 billion to the Sidra Hospital in Doha, partly operated by Cornell's Weill School of Medicine, Qatar. The primary contributors to Cornell were identified as the Qatar Foundation Qatar National Research Fund, Hamad Medical Corporation, and the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy. Texas, AANDM University has received more than $1 billion from the Qatar Foundation. These dollars come with strings attached. The agreement with the Qatar Foundation raises concerns about Qatar owning the intellectual property for research projects, access to sensitive student information by Qatar, and the lack of transparency in reporting funds. Over 500 Qatari-funded projects have been identified at Texas AANDM University, some in sensitive research areas with potential military applications. Other universities that have established branches in Doha through significant Qatari funding include Georgetown, Northwestern, and Carnegie Mellon. Columbia University was specifically pressured by the Trump administration regarding its Middle Eastern Studies department in the context of pro-Hamas protests. Columbia University has received large amounts of funding from Qatar over the years, but has not reported any of this funding to the Department of Education. There are also no references to connections between Columbia and Qatar in its financial statements. Columbia threatened to lose $400 million in federal grants and contracts, ultimately caved to the administration's demands, including to review its Middle East studies programs and overhaul its student protest policies by hiring 36 special officers and banning the use of face coverings to conceal identity.
Anti-Semitism, while we call it society's oldest hatred, is also one of the most difficult to recognize because it morphs.
Now, we are suing Columbia University, and that has gotten a lot of press attention. President Trump and his administration has announced that they are withholding over $400 million of federal funding for violation of Title VI under the Civil Rights Act. We are suing the school on behalf of a Jewish student who was subjected to a terribly hostile environment. I mean, hostile environment it's not even the right words. I mean, she could not go to school. There were so many threats of violence against Jews. She felt uncomfortable to go to school. The school then denied her special accommodations, Zoom accommodations, even though when they let students go take Zoom classes if they have to go to the dentist. So they wouldn't allow a Jewish student a Zoom accommodation because she did not feel safe on campus.
So they wouldn't protect her, and they didn't give her an accommodation.
Correct. And plus retaliation and anti-Semitism. So that's our case against Columbia University.
And Mahmoud Khalil was the mastermind behind all of this. And did you see his statement a couple of days ago that he was never anti-Semitic?
Again,
the
honestly, litany of excuses. Okay, so you're just pro-terror. And frankly, being the spokesperson for a pro-Hamas encampment doesn't immunize you from your illegal criminal allegedly activities of being the alleged organizer of these violent pro-terror encampments.
Khalil has been allowed to dictate this op-ed for the Columbia newspaper from ICE detention, and he took to it to slam the university as an institute that laid the groundwork for his abduction. To Columbia, an institution that laid the groundwork for my abduction, and to its student body who must not abdicate their responsibility to resist repression. Columbia has suppressed student dissent under the auspices of combating anti-Semitism.
Yeah, he's trying to pretend, surprisingly enough, this radical is trying to pretend that Columbia is some kind of far-right organization or something. It's preposterous. I'm extremely concerned about the fact that this guy, who has been in America on a green card, has been advocating for and calling for the total destruction of Western civilization, leading protests where Jewish students get attacked, leading protests where there's violence on campus, where campus staff get injured, where they smash up buildings. This guy is now becoming a free speech martyr to people.
The Trump administration initiated removal procedures under a specific, rarely used section of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, Section 237. This provision allows for the deportation of legal aliens if the Secretary of State believes their presence poses potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. Secretary of State Marco Rubio submitted a memo stating Khalil's presence in the United States undermines U.S. policy to combat anti-Semitism around the world and in the United States, in addition to efforts to protect Jewish students from harassment and violence in the United States. In immigration court proceedings, the government also alleged Khalil failed to disclose material information on his 2024 green card application, specifically his internship with UNRWA, his work history for the British Embassy beyond 2022, and his association with Columbia University apartheid divest. Khalil was a student activist and a lead negotiator and spokesperson for student groups like the Gaza Solidarity Encampments and Columbia University Apartheid Divest at Columbia University. A lawsuit filed by relatives of October 7th victims alleges that Columbia University's Students for Justice in Palestine campaign group was aware of the terror attacks before they began. The suit names several individuals and activist groups as defendants, including Mahmoud Khalil. The suit claims Columbia University Apartheid Divest supported liberation by any means necessary, including armed resistance, and operated as a public relations wing for Hamas, receiving financial and organizational support. This accusation is situated within a larger context of controversies and allegations linking these student organizations to Hamas, supporting terrorism, and engaging in anti-Semitic rhetoric and activities. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit base their claim of prior knowledge on the following specific alleged actions by the student groups. First, they point to the allegation that Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine posted on its Instagram account with the caption, "We are back," just 3 minutes before the attacks began on October 7, 2023, following months of social media inactivity. The post reportedly encouraged followers to stay tuned. Second, the lawsuit claims that a toolkit circulated on October 8, 2023, by the National Students for Justice in Palestine, a nationwide network tied to American Muslims in Palestine, must have been prepared beforehand. Some materials within this Day of Resistance toolkit, such as October 7th themed graphics, allegedly appeared on social media of some activists on October 7th, before the toolkit's public release on October 8th. Third, one of the claimants, former hostage Shlomi Ziv, alleged that his Hamas captors bragged about having Hamas operatives on American university campuses and showed him media reports of the Columbia protests. These accusations of prior knowledge are presented alongside a larger context of controversies and accusations about student groups' relationship with Hamas and their activities. The lawsuit alleges that Hamas founded supporting organizations in the U.S. which, after being exposed, led to the creation of American Muslims for Palestine, which in turn created National Students for Justice in Palestine, and that American Muslims for Palestine controls and funds National Students for Justice in Palestine. It also alleges that through these organizational ties, Hamas and American Muslims for Palestine, National Students for Justice in Palestine, provided financial, organizational, and other support to Columbia University, Apartheid Divest, and its affiliates for the encampment. Students for Justice in Palestine and terrorist organizations have expressed rhetorical support for one another. While there is no hard evidence direct financial ties between Students for Justice in Palestine and terrorist groups, the Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares' office opened an investigation into American Muslims for Palestine, also known as AJP Educational Foundation, Inc., in October 2023. The investigation by the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Section focuses on potential violations of Virginia's charitable solicitation laws. The office has reason to believe American Muslims for Palestine may be soliciting contributions in Virginia without proper registration and may have used funds raised for purposes not permitted under state law, specifically including benefiting or providing support to terrorist organizations. AJP Educational Foundation, Inc. has its headquarters in Falls Church, Virginia, which falls under the Attorney General's jurisdiction for investigating charitable solicitation law violations. Ties to organizations linked to Hamas. Sources suggest connections between Students for Justice in Palestine and organizations previously tied to Hamas. Hatem al-Bazian, the chairman of the American Muslims for Palestine National Board, was reportedly a fundraiser for groups like Kind Hearts, which had assets frozen amid allegations of providing aid to Hamas. Hatem al-Bazian helped establish Students for Justice in Palestine at University of California at Berkeley, and co-founded American Muslims for Palestine, which has been linked to the now-defunct Islamic Association for Palestine, once described by the U.S. government as part of Hamas's propaganda apparatus. Osama Abu Irshed, the executive director of American Muslims for Palestine, also worked for the Islamic Association for Palestine, which was found civilly liable for supporting Hamas. Another major financial node in the operations of groups like the National Students for Justice in Palestine is Westpac, an acronym for Westchester People's Action Committee Foundation, which is a New York-based nonprofit organization that serves as a fiscal sponsor for various groups. Qatar is a major and often undisclosed financial contributor to U.S. universities. This funding may be linked to a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-democratic, not to mention anti-American sentiments on campuses, partly due to Qatar's ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas terrorist organizations. This has led to increased scrutiny from the Trump administration concerned about foreign influence and transparency in higher education funding. Between 2001 and 2021, Qatar donated a whopping $4.7 billion to universities in the United States. Qatar is described as operating a war chest with between $500 billion and $1 trillion of assets to affect soft power in the West, including U.S. universities. A major concern is the failure of many universities to fully report funding received from Qatar to the Department of Education as legally required.
CUNY is the City University of New York.
CUNY is the biggest urban university in the United States.
To introduce to you Nurdin Mohsen Kizwani, who was elected by the class of 2022 to provide the Day Student Address.
A simple Google search should have led CUNY to conclude that she was inappropriate to be a speaker at a law school graduation.
She posted a video.
I hate your shirt.
Holding a flame to a man.
I'm gonna set it on fire.
As if she's going to
I'm serious.
Light him on fire because he's wearing something in support of the state of Israel.
If she had advocated for the destruction of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, would CUNY have allowed her to speak? If she had advocated for the destruction of Haiti or Jamaica, would she have been allowed to speak? If she had advocated for the destruction of any other country but Israel, there's no doubt in my mind that she never would have been given the platform of a commencement speech.
There are many moments in the last 3 years where I thought I wasn't going to make it. I've been facing a campaign of Zionist harassment by well-funded organizations with ties to the Israeli government and military on the basis of my Palestinian identity and organizing.
For the
freedom of all people living under colonial domination, imperialism, and white supremacist structures both around the world and here in the U.S.
That leaves no room then for the Jewish students to be able to effectively articulate, wait a minute, but what you're saying is anti-Semitic, right? It's not about white, not white, it's about our Jewish identity.
We've been able to pass a BDS resolution through student government, which CUNY faculty just officially endorsed yesterday. And CUNY Law is the first university in the country to publish a statement standing with the freedom of speech of those fighting for Palestinian liberation.
Now, she's entitled to say whatever she wishes. It's a free country with the First Amendment. But none of us is entitled to be a commencement speaker. When you deliver a commencement speech, you're not only expressing your own opinion, you're expressing a view with the imprimatur of the institution itself. And so ultimately, I'm outraged by CUNY's failure to police anti-Semitism on its own campus.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Resistance is justified! Resistance is justified! And people are occupied! And people are occupied!
U.S. imperialism needs the Israeli government as a thug in the Middle East to protect all the oil there. And so they're going to support Israel no matter what. And the media is promoting that message.
It is incumbent on the university to protect those students. And I think the issue is there has been no action by the university to do that.
We have
a pervasive culture of anti-Semitism that's engulfed our college campuses. The Jewish students and the professors all feel harassed, intimidated, afraid to express their viewpoints, afraid to be pro-Israel, afraid to just attend school. And we're here to listen to their painful testimonies and their trauma. And the Chancellor of CUNY, in a very cowardly move, decided not to appear. He canceled. Instead, he sent 3 witnesses who are here on Zoom. They're not here, they're not even here in this room. I do appreciate all the work you've been trying to do, but I think that we're here because whatever work has been done so far, it's not working. The anti-Semitism is only increasing. It's not decreasing. So we're here to explore different options.
Yes.
Do you believe that Jews have a right to feel safe on CUNY campuses?
Absolutely. I believe every single person does, especially Jews, given their unique history of persecution. Absolutely.
Would you agree that when Jewish students are discriminated against based on their nationality, religion, origin, or identity, when they identify as being Zionist, for example, it creates a hostile environment for Jewish students?
I would say it could create a hostile environment. It could create a hostile environment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the term boycott, divest, and sanction?
Yes.
Are you aware of any campaign on any CUNY campus to boycott, divest, and sanction any of these countries for their human rights violations? Russia?
Not aware, no.
China?
I'm not aware.
Iran?
I'm not aware.
Saudi Arabia?
I am not aware, no.
North Korea?
Not aware.
How about the state of Israel?
Yes, there have been for Israel, yes.
I'm going to ask this question. Why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose only one country has been subject to these actions and not any others?
Because some people are anti-Semitic.
Okay.
The status quo is fundamentally failing Jewish students on college campuses, so we need a new model of enforcement. I would impose a monitor on schools where there's a practice and pattern of anti-Semitism and require those schools to demonstrate real progress. A federal monitor on site who can see the facts on the grounds with his own eyes and then report whether a particular university is in compliance with the law.
Hi, good morning, Mayor. I'm here to see Councilwoman Vernikov.
Hi, yes, right this way. She's waiting for you.
Thank you so much. It impacts your entire life and then nothing happens. So a lot of people just feel like, why am I doing this? Why am I going through all this?
Because of you, we're able to actually commit CUNY to action. If we don't have people speaking out, then we don't have anything.
Newton's laws of physics. A force is inert unless it's acted upon by an external force, and you need external pressure on institutions of higher learning.
We now come to the elected speakers for the class of 23, the student speakers. Join me in welcoming Fatima Mohammed, elected by the graduating full-time pre-grad cohort, to offer remarks.
Fatima Mohammed's record.
Hello, everyone.
Is as hostile to Jews and Israel as the prior commencement speaker.
I want to celebrate CUNY Law as one of the few, if not the only law school, to make a public statement defending the right of its students to organize and speak out against Israeli settler colonialism.
She too was treated like a celebrity.
As Israel continues to indiscriminately rain bullets and bombs on worshipers, murdering the old, the young, attacking even funerals and graveyards, as it encourages lynch mobs to target Palestinian homes and businesses, as it imprisons its children, her silence is no longer acceptable.
Not only a standing ovation from the students and from her peers, but from the faculty and administration that were sitting on the stage with her.
we had this long one-day hearing on anti-Semitism where we exposed pervasive discrimination, harassment, anti-Semitism against students and faculty. How come after all of that, we still have a commencement speaker who is worse than the speaker last year?
CUNY didn't do anything, and we are back to the street to be clear and loud. Enough is enough. We are not going to go away.
This has to stop here in New York City. New York City is the Tel Aviv of America. If it happens here, it's going to happen anywhere.
CUNY has failed us, and it's time we hold the Chancellor accountable for the failures of CUNY under his tenure.
It took 2 weeks for their board of trustees to issue a statement condemning the speech.
If there is somebody who used the phrase hate speech in the statement, I did. I believe that right now at the law school, there won't be a student speaker at the next graduation.
Moving forward, we are trying to create a situation where we don't have a repeat of that again.
Could you share with us what schools you're talking to and getting good ideas from and are serving as good models?
We are looking at, if you look at larger institutions around the country, if I remember, University of Michigan.
Can I pivot for just a moment? I want to ask you about Marc Lamont Hill.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
CUNY has a storied tradition of rabble-rousing.
Same point, been dropped from CNN.
Why was he hired?
We demand decolonization. We demand an end to the occupation. We demand an end to apartheid.
During my freshman year here at Berkeley, there was a public debate. There were about 200 pro-Palestinian students. They started screaming, "You're a murderer, you're a terrorist, you're a supremacist." A friend of mine, she got approached by a pro-Palestinian student that said, "I'm gonna kick your ass." I went back home and I started crying. I was so shocked at what happened. I never really experienced hate the way I experienced it that day.
Parents actually hate talking about their time in Russia. It's always something that, I have to force into conversation because I think for them it's not the most fond memories of not being able to express themselves. Here at Berkeley, it's sort of a similar thing. Do I go into a conversation saying that I'm Jewish, that I'm a part of Jewish on campus, or do I kind of avoid that?
I don't tell many people I was in the IDF, just because, I don't know how people are going to respond here. I don't necessarily feel like it's the most open place that would be accepting of that. So coming here, I do feel like I have to hide that side of me.
I didn't realize how pervasive and severe the issue was.
Now just because we're kids, because we're sort of small.
I had no clue that Jewish students, for example, hide their Stars of David, that they're basically afraid to speak up in class or avoid certain classes on the Middle East. There was just a sense that they felt unwelcome and at times afraid. I have never experienced the kind of hatred that is being meted out to Jewish students on college campuses. It's had an immense emotional impact on me, I'd say. I definitely despair of the world. now more than I ever have, because the cruelty, it's undertaken so casually.
I'm from the former Soviet Union. My mother, right before we left the Soviet Union, she experienced a lot of anti-Semitism. And she said to me, I just want you to know, Naya, that when they say Zionist, they mean you.
It's that anti-Zionists treat Jewish students in such a way that would never be allowed if the behavior targeted other minorities.
Historically, if you were gay, society would tell you you have to be in the closet and you have to be ashamed of who you are. And today, if you're a pro-Israel Jew on an American college campus, you're often told that you have to be in the closet about who you are, and you have to be ashamed.
Hey, how are you?
A teaching assistant for a class made a tweet that she would lower the grades of Zionist students. And students who did things that were culturally related to Israel. An Instagram page called Share Your Story UVM would share anonymous submissions from survivors of sexual assault. In 2021, they announced that Zionists would not be able to have their stories shared through their platform.
We will always stand with our Jewish community in preserving the resilience, beauty, and culture of Judaism and Jewish life. What we cannot stand with is Israel and Zionists. If you're Jewish, you have to explicitly say that you don't support the state of Israel, or your sexual assault doesn't matter. Are you going to tell this to any other student whose countries have problems? Are you going to tell this to the Russian students, to the Chinese students, to anybody?
Despite mounting evidence, including live video of Hamas's savagery, women's organizations around the world have maintained either silence or criticized Israel itself for the war against Hamas. Yesterday marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the silence from feminist groups around the world is deafening. Joining us now is Anita Friedman, the chairperson of the World Women's International Zionist Organization from Tel Aviv. Anita, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you for having us.
These organizations, they say they serve women's interests, but if they can't even say a single word about rape as a weapon of conflict, what cause are they really serving here?
That's a very good question. And these organizations have the motto of, we believe you, we hear you. In this instance, they're making differentiations and they're trying to frame it politically. It's not political. It's gender-based rape. We also have men that have been raped. It's sexual violence in general. There's not bats. Women.
Now, you've probably seen the hashtag that went viral in response to the world's silence on the topic of Hamas's use of rape as a weapon of war. There was Me Too, unless you're a Jew. Can we truly dismiss the world's silence as strictly political and related to Israel? Or ultimately, does it come down to the age-old anti-Semitism that we've seen across the entirety of the world?
I think it comes down to the age-old anti-Semitism.
Jewish on Campus alerted us to a problem at the University of Vermont. We worked with them closely to investigate what was happening and ultimately to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights.
The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights opened an investigation into complaints alleging Jewish students at the University of Vermont faced, quote, severe and persistent anti-Semitic harassment.
We have an Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice, and we have one at the Department of Education. We have ones that deal with these issues. Right? So I was saying to them, what are you doing about this? You're just going to allow this to go on? We should put federal money in these colleges?
The university vigorously denies what it called a false allegation of an insufficient response, saying local media outlets even followed a, quote, uninformed narrative.
The university suggested that students were throwing rocks at the side of the building to get the attention of somebody who lived in the dorm. I lived in the dorm. They threw rocks at my window. They threw rocks at my neighbor's window. They threw rocks at my neighbor's neighbor window. Unless they're trying to get the attention of the entire Hillel building, I really don't think that's what was happening.
Today, a resolution agreement between the Department of Education and UVM was released.
UVM is committing to a review of its policies and procedures
training of university staff, students, and leadership, and report back to the Department of Education.
It was the first case actually signaling if there is a shunning or harassment or exclusion of Jewish students under the guise of anti-Zionism, that will be treated as a serious civil rights issue that needs to be promptly and effectively addressed by the university. And if the university doesn't do it, federal investigators will step in.
We're never going to get rid of anti-Semitism, but what we do need is to make sure that our society, A, begins to understand what anti-Semitism is, B, begins to understand what Jewish identity is, and C, begins to see the harassment and discrimination that's taking place for what it is and not confusing it anymore or allowing themselves to be confused into thinking that it's a political debate. It's not a political debate, and discrimination of Jews is not speech.
In many parts of the Muslim and Arab world, a critical distinction exists between Jews and Zionists. This distinction is not merely semantic, it carries profound implications for how these groups are perceived and treated. Understanding this distinction is crucial for comprehending the complexities of the Arab-Israeli conflict and its impact on interfaith relations. Many Muslims and Arabs draw a clear line between Jews who live peacefully within their societies and those who advocate for a Jewish state in the historical land of King Solomon and King David. This distinction hinges on the concept of Jewish sovereignty and its perceived threat to Islamic beliefs and narratives. At the heart of this distinction lies the definition of a Zionist. In this context, a Zionist is any individual, regardless of their religious observance, who supports the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. The core issue is the pursuit of self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in a land considered sacred by both Jews and Muslims. This desire for an independent Jewish state is often seen as inherently problematic by many in the Muslim world. It is contrary to their faith and view of the world. This has been spinned into a form of colonialism, an intrusion upon land considered by some to be Islamic territory. The historical context of the Israel conflicts, including the current Gaza situation caused by the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th, further fuels this perspective, particularly in the West. Conversely, Jews who do not subscribe to the Zionist ideology and are content to live in the diaspora, even under Islamic rule, are generally not perceived as a threat. This acceptance is often contingent upon these Jews accepting a subordinate status within a Muslim-majority society. This distinction highlights the central issue of sovereignty. It is not the mere presence of Jews that is perceived as problematic, but rather the aspiration for political independence and control over land considered sacred and historically significant. Theological roots of a divide. This perspective is deeply rooted in theological interpretations of history and scripture. Some Islamic scholars argue that the children of Israel, from whom Jews and Christians trace their lineage, were originally Muslims who strayed from the true faith. This deviation, according to this interpretation, led to a divine curse that resulted in the Jewish diaspora. Jews, it is argued, are meant to live scattered among nations, without a land of their own, until they return to the true faith of Islam. Challenging Islamic narratives. The establishment of Israel and the Zionist movement's success in achieving Jewish self-determination directly challenge this narrative. It undermines the idea of Jewish exile as a divine punishment and raises questions about the historical dominance of Islamic rule in the region. This challenge to deeply held beliefs fuels resentment and opposition to Zionism. It is seen as a disruption of the natural order, a defiance of God's will, and a threat to the rightful place of Islam. Beyond religious observance. It is crucial to understand that within this framework, the level of a Jew's religious observance is largely irrelevant. Whether a Jew is secular or strictly observant holds little significance when it comes to the question of Zionism. Support for Israel, even if motivated by purely political or cultural reasons, automatically places an individual in the category of Zionist and subject to the same criticisms and judgments. Societal impact and the future. This distinction between Jews and Zionists is not merely an intellectual exercise. It has real-world consequences, shaping societal attitudes, educational materials, and political discourse in many parts of the Muslim and Arab world. The demonization of Zionism, often conflated with Judaism as a whole, creates a climate of suspicion and hostility that hinders meaningful dialogue and peaceful coexistence. Furthermore, the concept of jihad and anti-Zionism is poorly understood in the West, particularly in today's university campuses. People do not seem to realize what a sign saying, "Globalize the Intifada" really means. It means that Islam should rule over the globe and all other religions are non-believers that must live under Islamic rule. Qatar's relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood is deeply rooted in history. The small Gulf nation has long provided refuge to members of the jihadist organization. This dates back to the 1950s, when the Muslim Brotherhood faced persecution in Egypt under Gamal Abdel Nasser. Qatar offered sanctuary to fleeing members. This history of support is intertwined with ideological affinity. While Qatar's government doesn't espouse the jihadist Muslim Brotherhood's full ideology, it shares some common ground. Both advocate for political Islam. This convergence has shaped Qatar's approach to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. This history continues to influence Qatar's stance on the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates today. Yusuf al-Qaradawi cast a long shadow over Qatar's relationship with the jihadist Muslim Brotherhood. A prominent cleric and scholar, Qaradawi found refuge in Qatar for decades. His presence and his pronouncements became synonymous with the Muslim Brotherhood's most extreme elements. Qaradawi's sermons and writings were laced with anti-Semitism. He praised suicide bombings as acts of martyrdom. These pronouncements, broadcast on Qatar-funded Al Jazeera, reverberated far beyond the Gulf. Qaradawi's presence in Qatar was a source of constant tension. Western governments and human rights groups condemned his hateful rhetoric. His pronouncements undermined Qatar's attempts to present itself as a modernizing force in the region. While Qaradawi's death in 2022 marked a turning point, his legacy continues to shape perceptions of Qatar's relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood has sent shockwaves through the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain view the Muslim Brotherhood as an existential threat. They have accused Qatar of undermining regional stability by harboring its members and amplifying its ideology. The 2017 diplomatic crisis was a culmination of these tensions. These nations, along with Egypt, imposed a blockade on Qatar. They demanded that Qatar cut ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, shut down Al Jazeera, and limit its relations with Iran. Qatar refused to comply. The blockade lasted for 3.5 years. It had significant economic and political consequences for Qatar. It also exposed the deep divisions within the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC. The blockade was eventually lifted. However, the underlying tensions remain. Qatar's relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood continues to be a point of contention in its relations with its neighbors. Qatar's relationship with Hamas provides a window into its complex approach to the Muslim Brotherhood. This relationship is not just about political alignment but also about jihadist ideology and regional influence. Hamas, the terrorist group that controls the Gaza Strip, is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. This connection is crucial in understanding the ideological and operational synergies between the two entities. It shares the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology and organizational structure. This shared foundation has allowed Hamas to adopt similar strategies and goals. Qatar has provided significant financial and political support to Hamas. This support includes direct financial aid, which has been crucial for Hamas's operations and governance in Gaza. It has hosted its leaders, facilitated ceasefires with Israel, and provided a platform for diplomatic engagement with the Hamas terrorist organization. These actions have positioned Qatar as a key mediator in conflicts. Qatar maintains that its support for Hamas is humanitarian. It emphasizes that its aid is aimed at alleviating the suffering of the people in Gaza. It argues that it is filling a void left by the international community. With many countries reluctant to engage directly with Hamas, Qatar sees its role as providing necessary humanitarian assistance. It also frames its engagement with Hamas as part of its broader efforts to mediate conflicts in the region. By maintaining open channels with Hamas, Qatar says it can contribute to peace and stability. Ironic, isn't it? To say that funding jihadist terrorist groups will contribute to peace, that is like giving guns to students and saying it will contribute to stop school shootings. Qatar's relationship with Hamas illustrates the challenges of its foreign policy approach. By engaging with groups like Hamas, Qatar is able to exert influence and play a role in regional affairs. However, it also risks being seen as a supporter of extremism. This perception can lead to diplomatic and political challenges, both regionally and internationally. Qatar's foreign policy is often characterized as a form of soft power. This approach emphasizes the use of non-coercive means to achieve national objectives. Qatar leverages its diplomatic relationships, humanitarian aid, and influential media outlets to project its jihadist ideological influence on the global stage. It utilizes diplomacy, aid, and media to advance its interests. Al Jazeera, the state-funded broadcaster, plays a crucial role in shaping public opinion and disseminating Qatar's perspective on international issues. Through strategic aid distribution, Qatar builds goodwill and fosters alliances with like-minded actors. Support for groups like the Muslim Brotherhood is part of this strategy. By aligning with such organizations, Qatar aims to influence political dynamics within the region. This support is not just ideological but also strategic, as it allows Qatar to extend its reach into various socio-political movements. By aligning itself with the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar gains access to a vast network of political and social movements across the Muslim world. This network is instrumental in promoting Qatar's interests and expanding its influence beyond its borders. This network provides Qatar with leverage in regional affairs. It allows the nation to play a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of the Middle East. It allows Qatar to punch above its weight in international diplomacy. Despite its small size, Qatar's strategic alliances and diplomatic efforts enable it to exert significant influence on global matters, often participating in high-level diplomatic talks and international negotiations. Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood is also driven by a desire to shape the regional order. Qatar sees itself as a champion of political Islam. This self-perception drives its foreign policy decisions and its support for Islamist movements, which it believes are integral to the future political landscape of the region. It believes that groups like the Muslim Brotherhood have a legitimate role to play in the Middle East's future. Qatar's endorsement of these groups is part of a broader strategy to promote political Islam as a viable and influential force in regional politics. This approach has yielded mixed results. While Qatar has successfully mediated several conflicts and fostered dialogue between opposing factions, its actions have not been without controversy. Qatar has been successful in mediating conflicts and fostering dialogue. Its efforts in peace talks and conflict resolution have earned it a reputation as a key mediator in the region. However, its support for the Muslim Brotherhood has also alienated allies and fueled accusations of double standards. Some countries view Qatar's actions with suspicion, questioning its true intentions and the consistency of its foreign policy. Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood has raised concerns about the group's influence in the West. Qatar is a major donor to universities and think tanks in Europe and North America. Critics allege that Qatar is using its wealth to promote the Muslim Brotherhood's jihadist ideology and silence dissent. These concerns have been amplified by the Muslim Brotherhood's history of anti-Semitism and intolerance. While Qatar insists that it does not condone these views, its continued support for the Muslim Brotherhood raises questions about its judgment. The debate over Qatar's influence is part of a broader conversation about foreign funding of educational institutions. Transparency and accountability are crucial to ensuring that these institutions remain bastions of free inquiry. Qatar's support for the Muslim Brotherhood is a complex issue with far-reaching implications. It highlights the challenges of navigating the intersection of foreign policy, jihadist anti-American ideology, anti-Semitism, civil rights, and academic freedom.
We're never going to get rid of anti-Semitism, but what we do need is to make sure that our society, A, begins to understand what anti-Semitism is, B, begins to understand what Jewish identity is, and C, begins to see the harassment and discrimination that's taking place for what it is, and not confusing it anymore, or allowing themselves to be confused into thinking that it's a political debate. It's not a political debate, and discrimination of Jews is not speech.
Moriel Borelli authored a book detailing his extensive conversations with Muslims and Arabs from various parts of the Middle East and beyond. He is originally from Long Island before transplanting to Israel. His journey began around age 21 while learning in a yeshiva in Jerusalem's Old City during the 2016 Knife Intifada. Witnessing terrorist attacks nearby, he realized the importance of understanding Arabic and what was happening around him. He started studying Arabic and, through language learning apps, began having conversations with Arabs and Muslims from places like Gaza, Jenin, Shechem, Jerusalem, Arab Israelis, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and Morocco.
A question that I asked on actually on TikTok, on one of these videos on TikTok, I wrote a comment and a bunch of people answered me, a bunch of Muslims, and they said, "You Jews are uneducated. You don't know what Islam is. You think it's a religion." And the truth is that they're correct. We are uneducated about Islam, about Arabic culture, about what they think, how they think, what they view. And this is a reason why I think that we have so many problems with them and that we need to learn much more about them so that maybe we can solve these problems. But
so what was their answer?
So their answer was Islam is a way of life. It's the only religion in the world because it's the correct way of life that God wants from from the people that he created. All the other religions, right, and it says it in the Quran, that there is no other religion other than Islam.
Right.
Initially, the goal was to practice the language, but the conversations took a sudden turn when he mentioned being from Israel or being Jewish. He frequently encountered the statement, "There is no such thing as Israel, it never existed."
What was Muhammad's role?
Okay, right. So first, let's go a little bit deeper into the concept of Islam. So in Arabic, this is also why it's so important to understand Arabic. The word Islam in Arabic means submission. To submit yourself to the one supreme God. The only way to do that, of course, is to believe in one God and in his prophets, because you can't submit yourself to God if you don't know what he wants from you. And he tells you what he wants through the prophets. So you have to believe in the prophets and you have to believe in God. So that makes you a Muslim. So if that's the understanding, then we could both agree that, okay, we can call Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all of the Bnei Israel, all the 12 tribes, and Moshe, everyone, they were all Muslim in that sense that they believed in one God and in the prophets that were sent to them. So, and that's a definition of Bnei Israel in the Quran. They're considered Muslim, and all the prophets that we know in our Tanakh, they were all considered Muslim. And it even says that Bnei Israel, that God took them out of Egypt and gave them the Torah and Mount Sinai and everything that we know in our Torah. But then they started moving away from Islam, from the righteous path, from this way of life that's called Islam. They started moving away. They started sinning. They sinned in idol worship and the golden calf, and they killed the prophets that were sent to them. They didn't listen to them. And they changed the Torah itself. They changed the actual text, and they perverted the text. And then they became Jews. So in the Quran, there's a distinction between Bnei Israel and the Jews. So for example, it says in the Quran that Bnei Israel were chosen to be above all of the nations. They're like the chosen people, and that God gave them blessings and all of these things. But that's correct when they were Muslim. And these are also in conversations that I've had with people. I tried to argue with them. I said, but it says that Bnei Israel were the chosen people, that God chose them. He took them out of Egypt. He gave them the Torah. And they said, yeah, this is all correct. But this is when they were Muslim, before they turned their backs to God and became Jews and created this new religion.
So Muhammad was necessary because the Jews had left the path of Islam. And so he was there as to try to force the Jews back or reintroduce Islam to the world after the Jews had perverted it?
Exactly, to reintroduce it to the world. So basically there are other verses in the Quran that say that the Quran it strengthens all of the prophecies and the books that have come before the time of Muhammad, meaning to Moses and to Jesus, by the way, who was also considered a Muslim prophet. I had a conversation with the girl from Morocco, like a video chat through this app. And we were arguing, and I told her, Jesus was a Jew. And she starts cracking up and laughing. What do you mean he was a Jew? He was a Muslim. So they don't even understand the terminology. There's almost no basis for an argument here, because the terminology, everyone understands it in a different way. So, but going back to the point before, the Quran comes to strengthen the revelations that came before to Moses and to Jesus, but both were perverted. So the final and last revelation comes to Muhammad so that he can bring back the truth to the world. And the problem is that those who are closest to this revelation that he brought to the world are the Jews, because he basically took all of the same stories, all the same ideas, the same characters, and he said, I am a continuation of those prophets. I'm not trying to bring any new ideas.
A crucial finding was the distinction made not between secular and religious Jews, but between Jews and Zionists. He never heard a distinction based on a Jew's level of religious observance or messianic belief. In this framework, a Zionist is defined as a Jew who wants to return to their homeland in Israel and have Jewish sovereignty, which automatically turns them into a Zionist in the eyes of those holding this view.
Breaking news.
The Jews they claim not to have a problem with are those willing to remain in the diaspora, preferably under an Islamic regime as second-class citizens, because this doesn't pose a theological threat to Islam. The return of Jews to the land of Israel and the fulfillment of Jewish prophecies like rebuilding a state or temple is seen as a theological threat to Islam, challenging the belief that Jews are cursed and meant to remain in the diaspora. He suggests that the concept of a secular Muslim as understood in the West may not truly exist, as Islamic teaching deeply infuses society. Education and people's perspectives are often based on this religious understanding, even if they identify as atheist. He found that even individuals from countries with normalization treaties with Israel, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Morocco, whom he spoke with often did not like or support Israel or the agreements. They believe politics don't represent the civilians. He has encountered some Muslims who view Israel positively based on their reading of the Quran itself. They argue against the common commentaries that say the blessings promised to Bnei Israel only applied when they were Muslim. He reflected that the worldview he encountered, which negates the existence of Jews in Israel based on a religious belief system, is inherently sad, and makes asserting Jewish existence a target for annihilation. He wrote a book about his discoveries from these conversations titled, When a Jew and Muslim Talk. Moriel Borelli's work provides insight into the religious and ideological perspectives held by many Muslims and Arabs regarding Jews and Israel, particularly the distinction drawn between Jews and Zionists as a core issue rooted in a specific interpretation of Islamic belief. Once again, university officials failed to protect the victims. The echoes of the past are deafening. Social media has become a breeding ground for anti-Semitic rhetoric. Online platforms amplify hate speech, normalizing prejudice. This online hate spills into the real world, fueling real-world violence. The threat is real and growing. History repeating, federal responses, and the fight for justice. The government's response to this surge in hate is crucial. Silence is complicity. We need action, not just words. Title VI. That beacon of hope from 1964 must be enforced. Schools that fail to protect Jewish students should face consequences. But legal action alone is not enough. President Trump is doing the right thing in freezing funds to universities that fail to protect the rights of all students. The fight against hate is everyone's responsibility, especially university officials. We cannot stand idly by while others are targeted.
Unfortunately, this year, GW has experienced many forms of hate speech. In early November, there was an anti-Semitic incident on campus.
A girl was videoed walking down the hallway of my dorm saying, we're going to bomb Israel, get out of here, Jewish pieces of you know what.
What are we gonna do to Israel?
Bro, we're gonna fucking bomb Israel, bro. Fuck out of here, Jewish pieces.
You are ostracized and marginalized, even if you are a progressive and a liberal. She turns around and she says, hey yo, we're gonna bomb Israel, you Jewish pieces of shit. And that caused all sorts of outrage at my school.
Outrage and condemnation, but that soon splintered into a debate on which aspects of what she said were anti-Semitic. Was it just the mention of Jews specifically, or was it also the call to bomb Israel? Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are not defined in the code of conduct here. Jewish students felt
How can the university adequately respond to incidents of anti-Semitism if they haven't even defined what anti-Semitism is?
The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism represents the Jewish experience of anti-Semitism today, including when anti-Semitism is masked as anti-Israelism or anti-Zionism.
It says what anti-Semitism is, and more importantly, it has examples relative to Israel. If you see double standards towards Israel, if Israel is being demonized or delegitimized in the same way that these things have been done to the Jewish people for centuries, that might well be anti-Semitism.
We thought that this would be the appropriate definition to propose to the Student Association to accept.
I stand before you today, urging you to support this resolution condemning anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is much more prevalent than you may think, manifested both violently and non-violently. The specific incident that prompted all of this is reprehensible, but it's just one instance that happened to be caught on video.
I remember lots of late nights going to the Student Association to get bills passed with IRA, which never happened.
This isn't about politics, it's about my right to live on this campus safely and the right of my fellow Jewish and Israeli students to carry their identities with pride.
Since I was a little kid, my mom always told me that I'm gonna have to work twice as hard because I'm Jewish, because I'm black, because I'm the child of a refugee.
My husband was born in the former Soviet Union. We have 4 kids, 27, 23, 14, and 10. 3 boys and a girl at the end. Yeah, they're Black Russian Jews. They're proud of who they are and what they are and where they come from.
And you can ask anyone in this room who's Jewish, who here has a family member who's a refugee? Raise your hand. Who here has a family member who fled persecution, who fled violence because of their ethnic religious identity? Raise your hand. This is what you're looking at, okay? This is our story. We have a right to be connected to our homeland, and for you to deny that is absolutely ridiculous. I'm not going to put up with it anymore, okay?
Jews originate from the land of Israel. The first time that he spoke on it, a lot of people saw and watched that it was a really big deal.
A number of senators said that it needed to be amended to take out any mention of the Jewish homeland.
This George Washington University Student Association Senate absolutely does not have the power, nor is it within our purview to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state.
The problem clearly was not addressed at its roots.
Raise your placard if you're in favor of adopting this First Amendment. Like high.
Anti-Semitism continued on this campus.
Police are investigating a vandalism attack at a George Washington University fraternity home.
Among the vandalized was a Torah scroll.
We had a Torah scroll that was vandalized inside a frat house, which was very, very distressing. Swastikas in dorm room halls and mezuzot have been torn off of doorposts.
It's disheartening, and we have to be strong together and be united.
Gelman Library, as projection showed words on the front of the building such as "Glory to our martyrs" and "Free Palestine," from the river to the sea.
Joining me now is Sabrina Soffer, a Jewish student at GW University.
I was very shocked, but I was not surprised, and I'll tell you why. I think that Jewish students have been warning of this kind of radical ideology by anti-Israel groups on campus, and this is just one extreme manifestation that they're really showing their true colors here.
At George Washington University, there is a master's program in clinical psychology.
Hi folks, how are you? You are in for a treat. My name is Lara, and
this psychology professor named Lara Sheehy, she was teaching a mandatory diversity class in the graduate school.
The very first day of the class, when the students were being asked to introduce themselves, one of the students, in speaking about their identity, mentioned that they were born in Israel. Unprovoked, without any hesitation apparently, the response from the professor was that it wasn't the student's fault that they were born in Israel. Professor Sheehy's tweets were offensive. They were hateful.
We must stand in solidarity with all liberation efforts. We must follow the lead of our Palestinian colleagues. We must center Palestine in every effort, and we must bravely support boycott, divestment, and sanction efforts despite threats and efforts to derail solidarity.
George Washington University is responding to allegations of discrimination and a complaint about a civil rights violation. The group that filed the complaint, Stand With Us, claims a professor in the psychology program targeted Jewish and Israeli students in the program's diversity course. George Washington University's president released a statement reading...
GW decided to hire an outside firm to conduct an investigation into what had happened.
I was actually very hopeful when they started investigating. I was really, really disappointed when the report came out.
The administration essentially vindicated itself of any wrongdoing. There were claims that the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that some of these students wanted to use was too broad.
It's important to think about how a situation like this would have transpired had the victims been Black or Latino and not Jewish and perceived as being white.
You have professors that are telling students things about their national origin, things about their ethnic background that are demeaning. And if those professors made those comments about any other people, they would be fired. And they're not, because it's directed towards Jews and Israel.
I am a Black man. I'm concerned and I'm also sad. Sometimes it's public humiliation of Jewish students, a real attempt to cut them down. And I think to myself, it's kind of unfair that, everyone kind of hesitates to do something about this. And it's wrong. It's not just unfair, it's wrong. And I think to some extent, evil, like a kind of evil that has always been aimed at the Jewish people.
I opened my email one morning to find the Department of Education has opened a full investigation into our allegations. It really was a tremendous relief to know that the Department of Education is taking this seriously, and for the first time, these students' concerns will be addressed. It would be fantastic to have the university educate the necessary faculty about Zionism and anti-Zionism.
Specifically my family, throughout his life, when he wore a Star of David for all of his performances. And I believe up into his death, but he also spoke periodically about my family as well as the recognition he had for the Jewish community.
What it means to miss New Orleans.
Louis Armstrong has a connection to a Jewish family, the Karnofsky family, which is my mother's family. The connection to Louis Armstrong is my grandfather's parents ran a junkyard, and so they would collect people's trash and they would bring it to the dump, and they took Louis Armstrong into their home and kind of raised him in a sense, and he worked for the junkyard company. And there's stories about how on the little buggy that they were collecting trash on, that Louis Armstrong was playing the cornet to let people know that they were coming to collect trash to bring to the junkyard. And the story also is that my family gave Louis Armstrong the down payment to buy his first cornet. He's paid homage to that connection to the Jewish community, and he wore Star of David as kind of a homage to him being brought in by this Jewish family, and also to show his connection to the Jewish community.
More than I miss New Orleans.
Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it each night and day?
I'm Yasmin Ohebsian. My mom is from Israel and my dad from Iran. Ohev in Hebrew is love and Zion is Zion. So it technically means like love Israel or love Zion, but in English people pronounce it Ohebsian.
Here in New Orleans, there was a historic partnership between Jews and African Americans, going back to the Civil Rights Movement. And I think one of the things that could really resolve these kind of issues is for Jewish and African American leaders on campus, like you're doing, and elected officials and across the country to really lock arms together and say we're not going to tolerate it.
Jews like Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner were murdered in the Mississippi burning so that people who look like me could have the right to vote and the right to live freely and without the indignity of Jim Crow. And so I just have this sense that we're all in this together.
Representative Richie Torres is correct. We are all in this together, and we must combat hatred in all its forms. It starts with Jew hatred, but it does not end there. It is a fight about civil rights in America. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Follow the link in the description to the full documentary by Stand With Us for more on all the college stories. And don't forget to watch the following documentary in theaters.
The terrorist group Hamas has attacked Israel in the air, on the ground, and in the sea.
The second I understood the depravity of what happened and the barbarism,
they've kidnapped Israelis, including children.
I thought that the entire globe would be in mourning. And not only was it silent, there was jubilation.
It was exhilarating, it was energizing.
I wasn't seeing an ideological disagreement. I was seeing hatred.
Free Palestine!
The hate started flooding in almost immediately.
Students called it resistance, they called it justified, they began calling Zionist students racist.
We are Hamas!
Standing up for being Jewish got me more hate than all the things that I have said on social media and on my podcast combined. And I've said a lot.
For every one video that is pro-Israeli, there's 54 pro-Hamas and pro-Palestine videos, sir.
Foreign state and non-state actors are seeding the online space with false narratives in order to impact the stability of Western democracy.
30 years ago, leaders of Hamas in America met and discussed strategy to hijack students' minds.
Israel, adapting the concept of intifada. Violence will follow.
Down with the USA! Down with the USA!
This is not about Jews. This is about democracy. This is about human decency.
What does it mean that the future leaders of the most important democracy in the world are chanting for intifada? What is the country going to look like a decade from now?
What is at stake is the soul of America.